Things that are not on the agenda? That are not on the agenda? Okay, seeing none. Next, now I can hear really loud. General business, we'll start with the information memorandum on reconciliation of public safety expenditures and fiscal reporting. Executive Director?
Hi there. So included in your packet is a brief informational memo summarizing the actions from the past meeting where the ad hoc committee requested that we bring back a public safety reconciliation of expenditures. And in our review of the work, we did begin the work, and then we realized that it was inappropriate for us to be completing work for which we transacted on as part of an organization. And so what we're proposing in the report is, in order to have an independent, non-conflicted report that the board ultimately can hear about the public safety reconciliation, that we actually have an independent auditor perform this work. And later on in the report, you will be hearing a presentation as well as what our recommendation is for selection of an auditor. And this would be something that the board can consider with respect to audit program and assignment.
So will you be making recommendations for us as to the auditor, or will you be contracting with an auditor?
We have two options for the ad hoc committee to decide between, and then obviously you guys can make a recommendation to the board as part of your discussion here. But for purposes of our work and completing it, we really think this is a piece of work that should be independent and non-conflicted, and inherent in staff completing the work, it would already be produced in a manner that is potentially conflicted, because some of the staff that would have to produce the results or engage in the work have transacted as part of the charging to the fund, or would have to produce that information or analyze it. And so we want to get off to a good start now that we have an audit line item in our budget. And before you later is to look at the auditing function. And so this would be something that the board can consider at a later time.
So do you want us to make a recommendation to the full stadium authority on this? Are you looking for that type of action?
It's an informational memo to say that this is when you consider the third item on the agenda, that could be part of the recommendation if you'd like, as part of the future work to be evaluated.
Okay.
But it's disclosure on my part that it would be inappropriate for us to audit our own work and then bring back work to the
That makes a lot of sense, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, any questions on that? Okay. Is there any other information on that particular item?
No.
Okay. All right. So there's no action. So next we have the status of the Harvey M. Rose Associates audit recommendations.
So we're going to pull up.
Do we need to turn
sure.
for this?
Okay. We're going to pull up a series, and I may even stand if I don't have a light. I don't have a pointer that I can point, but I will walk us through a couple of the slides. And the first is, there is good news in that we were successful in completing 8 additional audit recommendations, and we will provide a walkthrough as requested by the ad hoc committee at its last meeting, that we provide how the status of either being complete or partially complete has been achieved. And we have now at this point 5 that have not been implemented and 14 that are still in partially complete status. In the report, we thought that what resulted from our last meeting was good news by setting a work plan over a 4-month period of time that set reasonable expectations of what we could complete. I think the work shows here that through setting a work plan and being clear about what we hope to accomplish for a period of time is something that we can continue to advance through the ad hoc committee. And in fact, in your report, we set up another series of items that we'd like to accomplish. And I think we were feeling like July was a good time frame. We may want to delay it a little bit, just given the magnitude of work now that we've been able to identify the process and some of the due diligence that we would need to get through. So I want to take us outside of this PowerPoint and take us to the next chart, because the one item that we have not completed, and I spoke to this a little bit publicly at our last Stadium Authority meeting, is the due diligence on non-NFL events and achieving a point of where we can validate the non-NFL documents and the findings from the reports that we've been receiving. And I've tested this audit methodology or audit program that we would need to put in place in order to meet the board's needs. And I just want to walk through what the findings and what the program would look like, because there's been some, perhaps some confusion on my part with communicating clearly of what does it mean when we do our due diligence. And so in front of you, you have a PowerPoint slide, and I'm calling your attention to the documents section. If we think about this as deeming complete the universe of documents that we have to have in order to conduct due diligence, what that universe of documents is comprised of is year 1, year 2, year 3, and year 4 of all of the non-NFL events. And what we know is the universe of non-NFL events between events from year 1 to the last event for year 4 is 660, and it's broken down on page 3 of the report that we're in right now. Each of those 660 non-NFL events has its own package of information, both the revenue, the expenditures, and all the reconciliations that would need to be evaluated to deem the documents complete. What's making this process more difficult is, as articulated in our agreements, there are accounting practices that may have changed for each of the year 1, 2, 3, and 4. So for us to understand the universe of documents for years 1 through 4 for 660 events and say to you, the board, that we have a complete set of documents, we need to go through at the granular level each of those events, understand them against their accounting practices and policies, and then make a determination if the documents are complete.
Can I just have a clarification? The accounting practices of Manco?
Yes.
Not our stating authority.
Manco.
Manco. Okay, thank you.
Their record keeping, so that as we look at their packages of non-NFL events, we understand how they've filed away expenditures or how they're reported. So we've talked about having possession of documents, having access to read-only computer systems so that we can conduct this due diligence. We are working with Manco, and they're reporting weekly about the progress on trying to get to what is a successful full package of information for a couple of non-NFL events. But if we could get to one, we would be on our way to completing the rest of the 660. From there, once I can tell you that we have a complete set of documents for all of the 660 events over 4 years, we would then have to put the information into a system development, a database, if you will, and establish a methodology for analyzing and making findings. And what I've tried to depict here is we would have to analyze all of the 660 events, the data that is reviewed against their accounting policies, and look at, if I'm in the third block now, the comparison block, look at what was reported, either by rolled up numbers or the numbers that have been provided, and make sure that they are equal. So if you look at the validation, year X, whether it's year 1, 2, or 3, needs to be validated with the data that was reported. And if there isn't a ability to validate, then we need to find out where the error or the misread or the misreporting or maybe data entry issue on our side occurred. And so that is the scope of work, and that is why it has been so difficult with completing the due diligence, because there is a long series of review that needs to be put in place. And frankly, we started a process for which we had no training. We have no certified audits in-house. The resources and the administrative infrastructure was not established in order to be successful, and we are working to attain to a point where we can start to process the completion of documents and the receipt thereof. So that said, I'd like to get us to a point where we can continue to receive documents and validate them so that I can bring to you a suggestion that we have a complete set of documents, and then from there we hand it off to be analyzed and reviewed by an independent party against what has been reported out already publicly.
So that's year 1 through 4, but are you going to talk about what we're doing now, starting this next fiscal year that starts April 1st, so year 5? How are we going to look at that? Because I can see that year 1 through 4 is going to take a little bit of time to get all the documents and then to analyze them and to compare them. So what are we doing so that we're not starting year 5 like we have 1 through 4?
So as we are learning about the information that we need in order to validate the non-NFL packages, we're making sure that we are requesting that information as each event happens, and staff is doing a good job with already reviewing them and calling to their attention areas that we may not understand or areas that they may have to produce additional documents for us to better understand. We are, as we reported out, we're establishing a policy manual and fiscal accounting and our own fiscal practices. There's much more policies that we'll need to bring forward to the board. And there is obviously, I think we tried to demonstrate that as there is a lot more of a collaborative working environment where the documents that we are requesting, we are receiving, and we're having robust dialogue about moving forward, including, as you heard in the presentation, working together on performance metrics and issues around the budget. Okay. That is the hard part, though, is reconciling the past 4 years while trying to correct going forward. And so I just wanted to have that walkthrough because when I was asked publicly the question, it is a difficult question to ask. I didn't have the opportunity to put this on paper until this meeting and to really provide a more due diligent answer so that the board understands the magnitude of work that needs to be accomplished to get to a point where I can answer that's more to my satisfaction and obviously the board's.
Yeah, we can see that. So I appreciate that because I'm constantly asked, when are you going to get it? Where's the numbers? How much, do we make up a concert? When are you going to get those documents? And I can see with 660 events, that's a tremendous amount of events. And if we don't have all the information on each of the events, there's no way to analyze it year per year. So I like how you are methodically taking, each year and going forward. Making sure that we have the documents. I'm not sure we have all those documents.
I was negligent in introducing Catlin Ivanetich when I mentioned at the January session that what we need is a high-functioning analyst, and I sent an email about downgrading
Would
the
that
stadium.
be you?
Yes, that's Catlin. Catlin's
Welcome.
been on board. This is her 3rd week, and
it's your 3rd week. You don't have this done yet? Darn.
How many times has she run screaming from the building?
We're not going to ask her that.
Catlin was instrumental in putting this review program in place and the structure and methodology for which we would need to bring this public of this is the work ahead of us. So
very good. Thank you. Yeah, Pat, just jump in.
I understand that you're just getting these documents. Have you been able to look at them? Because I know Authority Member O'Neill brought this up a couple of times, and I think it's important that you get sufficient detail and minutia in those documents so they really understand each functional area and each expenditure and that. Are you, in looking at them, are you able to determine that you have sufficient detail in the documents?
We are, and in areas where we're absent information or there's gaps, we're engaged in very good dialogue around closing those gaps and getting the information that we need. But it is very time-consuming, and where we are missing documents, the burden is on us right now to identify where we're missing those documents and then to bring it forward to Manco to retrieve the documents. And so that has been an area where we've spent a little bit too much capacity, and I want to change that so that it is an easier, more streamlined way for us to bring information to close more quickly. So before I hand over the PowerPoint on audit by audit for complete and not complete, I just want to raise that our next period of time, our goal is to continue to focus on the receipt of non-NFL document records. Our other goal is to address the issues of the public safety threshold, which we talked about earlier, as well as for unreimbursed city staff cost. And I mentioned that last week we were feeling like we could do it in July. We started really raising our sleeves to get into the budget, to bring it to completion. I'd like to suggest we think about September, just so that we're better paced and we can get through the operating budget. That, if that's okay, I'm going to pass the PowerPoint presentation over to Angie.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. So as the executive director had pointed out, we did make a lot of progress. You can see that we, our complete increased by 80%, and partially complete, looks like it stayed the same, but it didn't actually, because our things that were not implemented moved up into partially complete. So we have 5 remaining that are not implemented and 14 that are partially complete. So we just wanted to walk through, because I think the board had some questions on had we really completed those. So we kind of wanted to talk it out and see, you know, why we think that it's been completed, but hear your thoughts on it also. So on the first audit recommendation 1B, this is the Stadium Authority Board should direct the Executive Director and Stadium Authority Council to notify Manco that the absence of a 5-year capital expenditure plans for 2014-15 and 2015-16 was a breach. I won't read all of it, but I'll just, one of the things we had mentioned is that we were implementing that going forward. You may recall from the budget study session that those were included in the budget document. So I wanted to include a snapshot of what was included at the study session for the 18-19 budget, and you can see it's the 5-year forecast.
So can I ask you something? Sure. Are you deeming this complete then?
Yes.
So even though it was missing from 14-15 and 15-16, are you just talking about things going forward?
So I think we're
not
trying
backwards?
to, yeah.
I'm trying to understand what you mean by complete.
So I think we're looking, and maybe the executive director would want to add to it, but looking forward.
This is all forward.
We are going back and
changes.
pulling all of the old documents, because as you know, a lot of us were not here. So we are asking, you know, we're looking in our files to see if we can find what was provided to us in the past for those years and see what level. But I don't think you're going to find this level. We've gotten much better.
Well, okay, so I'm just wanted to clarify, I'm not questioning this, I'm just, when you say complete, but it's not complete because 14 through 18 is not complete.
Maybe I have a slightly different take on it. So what I'm seeing is that the process going forward to implement a process change is being complete.
this is
Whether
the
the
process
audit
change.
of the past, yeah, so to me, I'm looking at,
Yeah,
these
I
are,
just want a
we're
clarification
implementing
because-
the process changes.
That's what, how our understanding and definition of completing the audit recommendation.
Process change going forward. Okay, thank you. I won't interrupt you anymore.
So I just wanted, so you'll see different screenshots so that I could show you that we have implemented those items. And I won't read each one. This was to provide a copy of the operation and maintenance plan. And as you know, also at the study session, this is part of what we call the SOMP, the Stadium Operation and Maintenance Plan. And per the agreements, that SOMP consists of the annual shared stadium expense budget, the annual public safety budget, and capital expenditure plan, as well as the amortization of the public safety capital expenditures. And that was provided to you at the study session, and it will also be presented again at the budget adoption on, I think, March 27th. So audit and please feel free to just jump in if you have questions. Audit recommendation 1D is requiring that Stadium Authority staff and Manco prepare an annual public safety budget in conjunction with the city's public safety departments, detailing both NFL and non-NFL event public safety costs. And that was part of the public safety budget that was presented to you. And here's just a snapshot. This year, I believe we had told you, but in the at the priority session I mentioned, we are actually going to break this out in the city's general fund, and you're actually going to see a program with, it won't match these because there's different fiscal years, but what we're going to do is actually where you can see the public safety budget in our general fund. So. On audit recommendation 1E, the stadium authority should direct the executive director to negotiate provisions of the stadium lease so that the stadium authority receives a share of the concessionaire revenue that exceeds the minimum guaranteed amount. And I think there was just a little confusion on the language on this one. We do receive that, and then as you know, we just came forward in February of 2018 with a new concessionaire agreement, and it included the same provisions as the previous one. So we do receive in excess of the minimum.
We've never seen a concessionaire number in the last 4 years, so are we gonna see a concessionaire number going forward now?
We are in talks and working on that, and hopefully
Seen any
what we're
numbers?
wanting to do is actually include it as part of the fourth quarter report. It's hard to show you quarterly because then you can actually, if we only had one event, people would be able to pull it out. But if we show you at the fourth quarter, which I believe we do in May, I think it's May, then you would actually be able to see the full roll-up. What we're working on now is we have the revenues, we're working on the expense side.
Because of the due diligence required from the previous chart, we're not able to provide a line item because of all of the good work that we still have to complete.
But eventually we'll be able to provide a line item so we can see what.
We'll provide a line item at the fourth quarter, because by that time, a series of events, what we're trying to honor is not being able to track the revenues associated with a particular event out of concern for contracts and proprietary information. We'll need to get through that information and bring back a line item that reveals food and beverage and what the fourth quarter information is what the activity is.
Okay, so we'll see that this year for last year?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, good.
May?
That's good.
Yes,
yeah.
yeah, because we'll have finished the last event, which is the Mexico-Ireland soccer game. So, Iceland, sorry. And so then we'll have those numbers for the fourth quarter. Thank
Still
you.
thinking about St. Patrick's Day.
It started with I. Audit recommendation or 1J is for the executive director to send formal notification to Manco and Stagco that there was a breach of the stadium lease. I believe this is on the 1-year budget and the 5-year projection of the shared stadium expenses. So again, this is something we've included in the budget. Here is the one from 2018-19. We had the shared stadium, not only our portion, but we put the full cost, both Stagco and Stadium Authority's costs on the top, and then our costs below that, broken down by the different percentages.
Okay, this is good, yeah.
And then on the next one, you can see that was the 5-year forecast that was actually also provided. On 1K, that is that the annual operating budget and quarterly financial statements report the excess revenue. And this was something I think we brought up in the last meeting, and I didn't answer it incorrectly because I said, oh, it's going to be in the quarterly report. But we can only do this once a year because it's once a year it closes. That's when all the buckets or the waterfalls sort of gets filled. So here is what we included in the budget document. Under the definitions, we actually had an explanation for that, but we have just finished the 17-18, so for the adopted, we're going to be updating that number, and it'll be the 17-18 that will be presented to you on the 27th. On 1L, this is the plans to develop, implement, and monitor marketing, booking, and advertising. So this is the marketing plan. And as you know, also at the study session on the 13th, there was a marketing plan presented, a sales and marketing plan presented to the board, and then it will be presented again to the board on the 27th for adoption. The Stadium Authority should direct the executive director to require that all meetings, including the date and the purpose of the meetings, be documented. We have started doing that. We issued a the executive director issued a quarterly report for the period of October through December 2017. And we'll continue doing that report each quarter. 1R is the procedures to ensure that all existing plans, reports, and budget documents required to be provided by Manco are provided. We have a schedule that we're using now to track the deliverables, so we are staying on top of that and making sure that we are working. It's a collaboration between the finance department and the city manager's office. On 2C, the Stadium Authority Board should require that detailed breakdown of performance rent calculations and payments to the City of Santa Clara be included in the budget and quarterly reports. We have been providing actuals in the quarterly reports, and I did include this in the presentation. I believe in the actual proposed document that you have from the 13th, it had the 16-17 performance rent calculation because that was the last actuals that we had. But I wanted to go ahead and show you what it is for the actual budget. And this shows you how the breakdown.
Angie, can I talk to you about, okay, so you call it performance rent calculation, but you have the ground rent in there too?
Yes.
Is that considered performance rent, which it's not, but you just put it in one bucket?
So I show it because I wanted to show that there's a credit. If you see down the second to the bottom line where it says performance rent credit, the way the agreement is written is that you subtract 50% of that ground rent. So I wanted to show you on the top how much that the ground rent was for, or is going to be for 18-19, so it's $320,000. So we have to subtract $160,000, which is half of that, from the, as you see, the 50% of net non-NFL event revenue, and that's how we come to the performance rent that's paid to the city. Does that make sense?
I see how you're doing it, but it's
so,
just confusing to the public. How much is performance rent? How much is ground rent?
Right.
Because they're two separate things, but you have them together because of the
calculations. Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then this also shows the gross non-NFL event revenue and non-NFL event expense too. On 2E, this is requiring that a comprehensive accounting of debt service fund transactions, including beginning and year-end balances, budget versus actual revenues and expenditures by specific line item be detailed. And we have started including that. We've included it in our quarterly reports, and now we included it last year in the budget, and we're including it this year in the budget. So I just wanted to show you, I think this was a slide that I had done for the budget study session showing the amount that's budgeted for debt. And then we also had a graph, and in the budget document, we actually had a few more schedules for the debt, but it didn't fit on the screen. So on 2F, this is about the discretionary fund, and again, this is something that we have been reporting on quarterly, and we did include it in the budget, the 18-19. Just wanted to show you at the top is what was actually included in the operating budget, so you could see what the expense was from in 16-17. We have the actuals, we have the estimated that we think is in 17-18, and then what we're budgeting in 18-19. And then the box below that is what's actually in the definitions, and it shows the same schedule for 18-19. 2G is I think it's similar to one of the earlier ones. It's to prepare the 5-year shared expense budget, and as I had shown you earlier, I just wanted to, it's a duplicate of what we had done earlier, but we have included the shared stadium expense for both Stadco and the Stadium Authority, and then the Stadium Authority share. And then again, this is the 5-year forecast.
So I'm going to ask you, because our biggest questions were regarding the shared expense budget and shared revenue budget. So from now going forward, we'll be able to see line items of both the shared expenses and the shared revenue.
On the shared revenue
that's coming in broken down.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, so you're talking about like
instead of it was all rolled together, it was a big rolled up number
on the non-NFL
events, expenses and the revenues, so that we can try to determine. Our goal is to determine what events actually make us money, which ones make us less money. You know, what kind of direction we want to give for marketing and others, at least for our non-NFL side, as to what events are really advantageous for us. But we can't do that when you have a big rolled up expense number and a big rolled up revenue number. So
you're talking about I just pulled this one.
Now I'm talking about shared expenses.
So on the shared expenses, we already showed that, but I think you're talking about, I put the slide back up over here. You're talking about the 62 million and the 57 million, I think is.
Right, yes.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
So our goal is, again, like we had mentioned, to try to show more of a breakdown of this number for you so that you can, like I said, in the fourth quarter, see what all those revenue items that you're talking about, the F&B, concierge revenue and things like that. I can't remember exactly what, we have the ticket sales, and there's several different line items for the revenue that we would like, and public safety costs we would know, right? Because we track it it's our cost, yeah.
I want to just add that, and you may be making the assumption as we have the conversation, we kind of slipped into it as part of our budget discussion at the Stadium Authority Board meeting. These are budget projections based on trends and averages and projections, what we think is going to occur. And so as the first quarter is completed, we'll start to refine the budget against the actuals. And so by the end of March 2019, you will have in front of you the actual expenditures and how well we did with projecting it. So that's the one also disclosure for the ad hoc committee, is that none of these numbers are actual and yet expended or generated by way of revenue. They're just
based on.
Our best case budget projections. It's much like our operating budget. After quarter one, we start to look at expenditures. Generally by quarter three, you could start to close up what you think you could forecast for the last and start to make some assumptions based on activity that you know will occur, much like what we're doing with our operating budget at this point in time.
Okay. Thank you.
That's a very good, I should bring that up maybe at the budget adoption too, because you're right, we just looked at past history, and that's how we came up to this number. And so what we'll be doing is watching to see how many events we have, if we're staying in line, and you may see some budget adjustments as we go on that line item, those line items. Okay. On 2H, this is
Can I also just add before we move on, so that said, we were looking at the rolled up number here, but the structure, the charts in the fiscal year 18-19 proposed budget are developed with that in mind so that we can start to plug in actuals and you see more detail about the budget expenditures and revenues generated. So this, if you look at the tables, we'll start to populate those with actuals under quarter one, quarter two, or at the right period of time so that you have that information.
On this one, it's asking that we start coming before you before we actually make a budget adjustment. And as you know, we just adopted a budget policy that requires that we do that. We've been very proactive, I think, at the last year, coming forward to you during our quarterly reports and asking for budget amendments if we thought we need them. We'll be including a budget amendment on the budget adoption report on the 27th for the 17-18 SBL revenues. We actually brought in more than we had originally budgeted, so we want to make sure that the debt budget is correct. So you'll see that coming up. On this one, it's asking that the Stadium Authority Board and the City of Santa Clara clarify when the City Purchasing Authority procurement thresholds apply and when the Stadium Authority procurement policy thresholds apply. And currently, if the City of Santa Clara buys something or pays something on behalf of the Stadium Authority and we pay them back, the city's purchasing is much more restrictive. We have a more lenient policy for the Stadium Authority. We always follow the city's more restrictive policy. We are in the process of going out to hire a purchasing manager. Yay! And one of the goals for that.
Editorial comment. I thought we had one.
She retired in December, so we've been short-staffed. So it'll be good. One of the goals for that position is to update the city and stadium authorities' procurement policies. So we'll actually see that coming forward. 2L, the Stadium Authority Board should require that all budgets and actual expenditures for the stadium construction budget be presented alongside the Stadium Authority operating budget. And as you recall, or may recall, we came forward and the warranty work, that's the remaining of the construction budget. So we have been showing it. I outlined it in red to show you where it is on the 18-19 budget. And we also brought it, I believe, in the mid-year, I brought it and showed it again in third quarter. So that's what that is. That's the only remaining amount left from the construction now.
Did you say you showed us the expenditures from the construction budget?
On this is what's remaining.
It wasn't the audit of the whole.
Oh, okay, because we
Yes.
asked for that and we talked about that.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just the warranty
Okay.
work.
Just the warranty work.
Yes,
Okay,
that's
thank
the only
you for that
remaining left, yeah,
clarification.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, because I think it says it should be presented alongside as if going forward, so that's why we wanted to make sure that that was pointed out. So, this was the, that revenues and expenditures on the accrual basis, and as you recall, we did that in the third quarter and are now showing this on the accrual basis. On 3B, this is again the annual comprehensive public safety budget, and also showing or saying that we needed to break those out. Let's see, so we did, again, this is a kind of a duplicate of one of the others, but they did provide the public safety budget.
Can I ask a question on that? Since we didn't have those in the 4 previous years, will those be reconstructed based on information? Or was it the public safety plan?
I know we received it in 17-18, so we could provide that if that's what, but I don't know before that if it was.
Yeah.
So I think we were mostly looking just to what the cap, what we were hearing, that's why with the use of the discretionary fund and all that to prevent the impact on the performance rent was that we were hitting the cap all the time. So we weren't necessarily seeing a big breakdown. We were just being told the total cost is over the cap, and that's why we, kind of
Right,
started that waterfall thing.
I'm just wondering, when we get the actual documentation from year 1 through 4, will that be recreated in some fashion?
Maybe the auditor?
All the costs and everything.
So it goes back to the middle chart that you have in front of you. The middle box is based on.
Analyze.
Where once we get to a complete set of documents, then what we ask the outside auditor or reviewer to analyze, they'll be able to provide that information to the extent that it is available, because I have to acknowledge that my understanding, and I looked at the budget itself, was just 3 pages long. So the supporting data, the worksheets, or any information.
It wouldn't take long to go over it if it was only
Well,
3 pages.
and therefore it may not be there. It may not be there. And so I don't know that, but I do acknowledge that the information as we're breaking it down today is based on the due diligence of staff and what happened in year 1 through 4. I cannot say that with just that information review, we could produce a chart like this.
Okay, so that's part of the analyzing
Right.
stage. All right, thank you.
Can I just point something out on the public safety costs? Unlike any of the other costs, the public safety costs are all, the records for the public safety costs are all within the city. So the way the public safety costs works is that they're all city employees or under contract with the Highway Patrol, some other agency. And so we're paying those bills, we're paying those payrolls. So the issue is not getting those records from the 49ers. The issue is making sure that we recaptured all the costs that we expended
From all the
on
different funds they may have been spent from.
And therein lies the problem.
Right.
Because if you recall, the coding of time cards and how information was recorded by staff about expenditures, the directive from the city manager in terms of putting into place that policy is fairly recent. I can't say that it goes back to year 1.
From this committee, we're the ones
About a year and a half ago.
And so therefore, there's, there's,
year and a half, something
yeah,
like that,
it goes back to that chart with the practices that we have today yield a different set of information. And in order to look at year 1, we have to look at the practices that were in place back then. And I don't think, it sounds as if that practice wasn't in place.
And there was some auditing of that through the Harvey Rose audit. I mean, that was one of the things they were asked to do. So there was some look at that. I think the outstanding item from that was the construction fund about, how those costs got paid.
Okay. And we'll get those answers through other third parties possibly. Thank you.
I have to say, she was very surprised when she saw that the budget was only, 3 pages? So the conclusion and next steps. We, as I mentioned in the beginning, we had 8 additional audit recommendations completed. We have 5 recommendations not implemented. We've got a robust tracking and monitoring of the audit recommendation implementation. We presented you with a work plan for the next 3 months, but sounds like it may be a little longer if we meet in September. And then auditing function is key to our next steps. And I did want to mention, we are going to be sending the staff member that currently does the review to auditing training, just so that they have that background too, so going forward.
No, we appreciate, you've done a tremendous, tremendous amount of work taking that audit and coming up with this. And I like the approach of working from present day forward, at least get it on track now, and then we'll have some time to go backwards and true up whatever needs to be done.
I'll share with you Walter's goal. And
What is Walter's goal?
Walter's goal is that he would like to see these all audit recommendations implemented by fall. So we're going to hold Walter to
Thank you.
Could he sign that, put that in writing and sign?
It's a goal. It's a goal.
No,
But we feel like
we
we're making
appreciate
progress.
that. This is really, really tremendous work that you've all done. Really, I feel much more comfortable now. Okay, are there questions? Staff? Yes, go ahead, Pat.
I want to echo the mayor's comments. I was glad when the Harvey Rose work was completed and we have these recommendations. In my wildest dreams, it never occurred to me that such detail about each recommendation, picking it apart, explaining what it meant, would happen. I'm overwhelmed by the work that's gone into this. I think this team that you've assembled is going to make us accountable. You know, the fault of this happening and this being required, the Harvey Rose audit and that was not ours, but the responsibility was, and I'm glad that the committee, that we're taking the responsibility to look into all of this so the people can see what the truth of the matter is. There's so many rumors and innuendo flying around about the stadium and the financing of it and that this will shed some light on it, and it's probably long overdue. I'm just very thankful for what you all are doing.
We'll move on, then we'll go to the public at the end.
Okay, wonderful. Walter Rossman, Chief Operating Officer. So the goal to get this audit recommendations done is in order to put processes and procedures in place for the future. So that's why we want to focus on that work now. Part of that is also looking at the appointment of a stadium authority auditor. This stems from a civil grand jury recommendation that the function between treasurer and auditor should be separated. The council, the board agreed with that recommendation and amended the JPA agreement last year, in actually June 2017. So with that, we now have an auditor function, which is really primary purpose, and there's 2 functions really. And it's to designate such independent auditing responsibility to an outside firm as it deems necessary, but including and not limited to making arrangements for a certified, I just said this, and independent audits for accounts. So basically, hire an external auditor, as well as other audits as the auditor deems necessary. So the possibilities the options the board has is to hire somebody to take on this function or to designate a city employee to do this. We believe having the function internally may be more helpful because they're embedded in our systems and they understand those with a direct reporting relationship to the board and this committee as necessary. So we're in the process of hiring an assistant finance director at this time, and if the board would agree with our recommendation, we'll definitely look for somebody who has these abilities and capabilities and could serve in that function. So we asked the board to make a recommendation to the committee to make a recommendation to the board, which we can take forward in a future board meeting.
So is that something you want to, yeah, Pat, do you want to make a recommendation?
I wanted to.
The alternatives are pretty clear. The recommendation is crystal clear.
I just wanted to add a little bit more because in our
Might need it from
report.
our committee to go to the full stage.
Okay, sorry.
Board.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I understand I'm interrupting, but in our report, we said we make no recommendation, but over the weekend, we thought about it, we talked about it today, and internally, just based on the robust program that's already shaping up for it. We want our dollars to be stretched and to attain the highest level of independent review. And the assistant finance director, if this is the direction that the ad hoc committee would recommend to the board, would be the coordinator of the consultant who is performing the audit work or the review work. And they would coordinate the contract, the scope, and provide those administrative support to the board. Ultimately, the consultant and the audit program reports directly to the board on how we are doing our work and the procedures that we're putting in place. But this person would serve on the liaison, as a liaison to the consultant. Why that's important is because you have a choice. You can either pick an auditing firm to serve as your own liaison and report directly to you at perhaps a higher cost. We can verify that. Or you can pick a staff person who is practiced in that background, who serves as the liaison so that you can stretch your dollars that are in the proposed budget.
All right, so you're talking about one of the options is to hire a staff person for the stadium authority that provides the auditing functions to report directly to another staff person that reports to the stadium authority board? I'm a little confused.
Let me be clear. So we have a vacant assistant finance director who will serve as the assistant treasurer to the board. And we are in process of beginning to recruit for that position. And we have an opportunity to include, as we go through the resumes, the requirement for past auditing experience. A lot of times these financial positions have that kind of experience. That person would work with the board on an audit program or any type of management review or performance reviews. And because of what we don't have the expertise in-house, we would have to consult out for it. And that person would administer the competitive programs and bring to the board their proposed work plan. And just like we're keeping track of the audit recommendations, do the similar work based on very targeted reviews. That we think can be done in-house and still maintain the integrity and the independence and the non-conflicted approach to work. We've seen it done in other organizations. Or if you are concerned with the independence and wanting to ensure very bright lines, you could consult with an auditing firm to play that role that reports directly to the board that I just summarized would be the assistant treasurer's role, and then also do the audits. So it's really up to the board to decide, and we wanted to bring that first here to the ad hoc as we had mentioned it at our last meeting.
Would the assistant treasurer, would that be a full-time position for the stadium authority?
No, that would be an assistant finance director / like my role or like Angie's role / assistant treasurer.
So because one of the problems we had in the past is that we asked our existing staff to take on this another billion-dollar asset and manage it, help manage it, which left them, stretched for time, resources, and many times expertise. So I don't want to set ourselves up for failure if we're going to undergo the same issues if we're hiring a part-time person to do this. But is the part-time person like an air traffic controller that says, okay, we need this and this and this, but then the buck stops with that person?
The person would play the similar role as what Brian plays as counsel to the board. I play as executive director. Angie plays as treasurer, but just in the assistant treasurer capacity. So, I really think that your comment about the workload is very much appreciated.
Well, I mean, this is just a sample.
Yeah,
right?
And there is a robust set of work plan items already to be under development, as you can see from today. What I think is important, though, is our budget and how far we can stretch it. So it really is for the ad hoc committee to make a recommendation to the board. We put no recommendation, but over the weekend we said, you know what, our dollars will be stretched further if you approach it one way, and that's important because ultimately, we are limited with our budget.
One of the things when we were talking about the stadium authority initially, I thought in our discussions and maybe in some documentation somewhere, I don't know, Pat might remember, we envisioned that there would be separate dedicated staff for the stadium authority, and it was quite a large number of people. So I'm wondering, I don't even think we're close to what we talked about originally in terms of full-time staff for the Stadium Authority. I know that the workload is going to be a lot bigger until we, set these new systems in place, and then, of course, going backwards 4 years, that's an enormous effort. But at least in the beginning, I want to make sure, we get this on track and have enough help, staff help, that we can get this on track for the future. So I'm not sure a part-time person. I know would have the staff of all of your office, the Stadium Authority attorney and finance director of the Stadium Authority. I mean, there would be a lot of help, but I just want to make sure it's enough.
I think I could easily argue, as Brian probably the same, could argue that we do need dedicated staff for the Stadium Authority. We have made a lot of progress by adding more to the team that was already in place, but the workload on the city side that we talked about in January and the workload here, we could easily fill someone's plate on either on the auditor side or on the finance or city manager side.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we're realistic about the actual amount of work. Teresa?
Well, I think Brian looks like he wants to say something.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to remind the committee that the basic document that created the Stadium Authority, the Joint Powers Agreement, one of the officers, basically, that the board appoints is an auditor, but this is a separate function. An auditor is a separate function, and the grand jury pointed out the auditor had to be a separate function from the finance director. So originally, the finance director was also the auditor, and this brings up an interesting and an important distinction between the issue of contract management and auditing. We have a tremendous amount of work going on here trying to manage this contract, and the Harvey Rose audit brought out the inadequacies of our prior contract management as it was. So the work that's being done here is really trying to, based on the Harvey Rose audit, get the contract management end of it in place. But an auditor would not be doing contract management. An auditor would be performing the function that the board requires, which is to basically audit the relationship between our management of the contract and the people performing the contract. So that's the role of the auditor. It's meant to be a separate role, and that's why the auditor was not appropriately the finance director, and that's why the board made that change last June to amend the agreement to designate a separate office of auditor, not the finance director. So basically, the question for the committee to look at and to recommend back to the board is, do we have as the auditor role that's set forth in the Joint Powers Agreement, is that an internal city person who can coordinate this external work of an outside auditing firm, direct the work, bring the work forward, be the liaison between the outside workers who are going to do the audit and the board, play that independent role, or do you want to contract directly with an auditing firm to just be the designated auditor? And I think that the city manager is basically just apprising you of the fact that there could be a significant cost difference depending on how you wanted to set that role up. And there may not be as many advantages to having a totally independent auditor as a contract person versus an in-house person. So that's really what we're trying to find in terms of a recommendation from the committee.
That clarification.
Okay. So on that point, is it staff's opinion that having a city staff person who, report an assistant treasurer that would be reporting to the treasurer, is that sufficient distance to ensure what they were looking for in some level of independence in the grand jury report?
I think for purposes of you designating that person, the person, to the extent that they are designated as the auditor, they would not report to the finance director in performing that role. They would independently report directly to the board.
Okay.
Is
So
that correct? Is that correct of what you're
That is
envisioning?
correct. And so, and that's why I reinforce the fact that this is very common in other agencies where, much like we wear a couple of different caps, the person is able to perform in that independent duty and then at the same time place themselves back in the organization for other work. I want to say that, or I should back up a little bit, why we thought about this over the weekend is because we're in operating budget development on the city side, and we are bringing forward some recommendations to add resources so that we work in pre-audit capacity and from a pre-audit standpoint. Because as I mentioned in January, risk management issues, contract management issues, and the absence of audit is something that we have to cure internally. And so having the assistant finance director on the stadium authority side play that role, we're also thinking about that on the city side and having a liaison to outside work that we have to have. And so we are trying to strengthen our resources on both sides of the public entities that the board reviews work for.
Okay, so to kind of follow on this argument here, so then so say if we go with the assistant treasurer or whatever is designated to fill the role, the official role as the auditor, and then we would still then have a outside contractor do a lot of the legwork, the actual compiling, the examination of records, and then that person would report into the auditor or work with the auditor to prepare a report. So are we looking at somebody that's not just a straight financial auditor, but has somewhat of the elements of being a performance auditor?
Yes.
Okay. And so then based on what you're saying too about fulfilling this role, because we know that this Auditor General thing is one of my little hot buttons, that if this assistant to Angie is filling this role for the stadium, and then if they're kind of filling that same role for the city functions, that sounds like a full-time equivalent, right, or more right there. Is there any bandwidth then to give? Does Angie still need to have additional management support?
And that's where I wanted to back up in that we are bringing forward we are filling the procurement manager. We are bringing forward a request for a contract manager. We are bringing forward a request as part of the operating budget, a risk manager, a management analyst. And so we are looking at starting to close these gaps here in the organization that we identified in January through the budget process. So this initial set of investment we think is a good start and probably about as much as our budget can stretch.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you. That's what I was looking for.
I just want to make some comments in support of alternate number 1. And maybe this will dispel some of your concerns. Number 1, having a stadium auditor that reports to the stadium authority and the executive director is a huge increase in staff since we have nobody now. And we're having to rely on finance and their staff to do this job. So that's a 100% increase in staff. Number 2, I like the idea of the independence. I'm sure that they will work very closely with a finance director and a stadium authority executive director to accomplish their goal, but the city council, the stadium authority is going to set their goal. And so that's a step in the right direction, I completely believe. And it's not unusual to have a government employee being a watchdog of government agencies. We have, in the police, we have internal affairs that investigates the conduct of the employees. In the federal government, we have the Inspector General that reviews the accomplishments of individual departments and agencies and reports back to the authority. So that's a pretty standard way of doing business. And I think if the auditor to the stadium authority comes to the stadium authority and says, I need some more help, I need somebody to do an audit on this functional area, that we would probably agree with that with the recommendation of the executive director. So this makes total sense to me that we're doing this. And with all those other positions that the executive director just explained to us that are being added, I think our billion-dollar building and our multi-million-dollar company will be adequately served. So I think we should make it our business to recommend this to the entire authority and convince them how smart we are and why they should do what we say.
Okay, let me, if I can ask another clarifying question. So then, is the functions of auditor that we're describing, does that then, are we then at this point suggesting that the auditor function that's described in the city charter that has been for some years assigned to the city clerk's office or city clerk's position would be assigned to this position? And because a lot of people think that those audit duties are by charter owned by or assigned to the city clerk, but it's up to the council or whatever to decide who's going to fill that role. So it sounds like, are we talking about a shift
The
there?
charter is not what merged the city clerk and the city auditor.
It's a city council
In fact,
action.
the charter actually says that there's 3 city council appointees. This is directly in the charter. The 3 city council appointees, direct appointees of the council, are the city manager, the city attorney, and the city auditor.
So that, so what
So
I'm
the
trying to
voters
clarify
do
is
not.
this person filled that role?
Well,
that
that's a
role.
different question. I just wanted to point out that the charter does not assign the auditor role to the city clerk.
I understood.
So that was done by I think there was an ordinance that might have been passed by a previous city council that made that. And then that was, there'll be a subsequent report on all the legal steps that were taken to create that supposition, but it's not that the charter does it itself.
Yeah,
And
understood.
I believe it's correct to assume that this person, this staff member, would be responsible to the stadium authority and the executive director, and it's a sole separate function from the city auditor.
Well, I thought I heard
Well, yes,
something different.
they are, okay, this is how it works. The charter gives the city council the authority to appoint a city auditor, and the joint powers agreement gives the stadium board the authority to appoint a stadium authority auditor. So there are 2 separate appointments, 2 separate authorities to do the appointing. The council and the board can choose to do this, appoint the same person, or use the same methodology, or they could do something different.
Right, so I
nothing-
wasn't.
So from a standpoint of what I meant by my comments is, I was not intending to get into the council's appointment for the city auditor as described in the charter. They're ministerial by nature. And what I'm getting at is getting our staff to work in a pre-audit approach where we are building that set of resources internally so that we can improve our performance and better manage risk. So that is very separate from any work that the council still has to do with respect to assigning those city charter duties.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to clarify that.
So I have a question about this appointment and of the Stadium Authority Auditor. And then the Stadium Authority Attorney made a good point about managing the contracts of the Stadium Authority may not necessarily be the same role as the Stadium Auditor. They wouldn't be at all, right? So who or would they jointly be responsible for helping the Stadium Authority Board assure compliance with Measure J? Like would it be a combination of the 2?
In an ideal world, as if we were to fast forward maybe 3 or 4 years from now, we are responsible for implementing.
We may not be here 3 or 4 years from now.
We are, the Stadium Authority staff is responsible for implementing the management agreements and all the different agreements that are in place. In a governance structure that we're trying to achieve, a separate independent auditor who reports to the board would provide their findings of how we are doing on our management agreement implementation and holding up the management agreements, and report to the board their findings so that then, in turn, we take those audit recommendations and begin to improve our management practices. So as a clean rule of auditing, an auditor cannot audit what they are involved in managing. And that goes to the public safety reconciliation as to why we wanted to draw those bright lines. So we would be working very collaboratively and in parallel, but ultimately the auditor would look at our work performance and report that publicly to the board independently.
So in this recommendation here, direct the executive director to bring forward the board's consideration the appointment of a city employee to the position of auditor of the stadium authority. Is that a newly created position of the auditor of the stadium authority? Is that, we're going to create the position?
I think Brian said it would.
I know we have.
In we put it into the Joint Powers Authority.
Right, but I mean, since we don't have a person that's designated in that position at this time, it's a new hire?
It's a new hire, and
new
what
appointment.
we're doing is we're redesigning the assistant finance director / assistant treasurer position, if you think about having it coordinated in-house, or the ad hoc committee has the opportunity to recommend that you just hire a separate firm.
So just for practical reasons, you have this person that's the independent sort of auditor that's accountable to the Stadium Authority Board for half of their day, just making this up, half of their day. But then the other half of the day, if they work for the city, they report to the finance director and the city manager. So how is that person going to maintain their independence if they're at some point still reporting to the people that they're might be auditing in a different hat and different title?
So it goes back to establishing policies with the board in terms of having a clear line of delineation of where the assistant treasurer's work would begin and stop. They would serve as a liaison to the independent auditors or agency that we need to hire who would issue independent. So they would become like a contract coordinator and say, for example, the board wants public safety reconciliation. They would negotiate the contract, negotiate the cost, the timing, manage the work, and report back to the board.
Okay, that's clear. I'm just trying to get it clear in my head what this position looks like. Okay, all right. I see that. Okay, is this the last item we have on the, so let's go ahead and hear from the public and then maybe ask the committee for recommendation to bring forward to the entire Stadium Authority Board. Is any member of the public wanting to speak on this or any issues, please? Mike O'Halloran. Oh, thank you very much.
The main reason I'm here is actually gets, I think, maybe along the lines of Councilman Kolstad's comments, is that there's such negativity, so many innuendos that I think the council are doing, and I think they're getting past the media. Before this audit came out, there's all this talk about the 49ers owing the city $2 million, as if the 49ers were trying to hold back on it, and it's just bad. And then when you ask detailed questions as a member of the public, you get kind of ideas about, you know, basically, no, that doesn't apply to it. I asked the question about the public parking and how that went, because that, and the city attorney said, well, it's not really part of the deal. It's not part of Stadium Authority on there. And it actually was a specific comment by Harvey Rose Audit that the city was owed $718,000. One thing that's interesting on that, I dug into it a little bit, and I found a letter from the 49ers to the prior finance director that almost seemed like it was answering that same question. They obviously had paid some amount of money and then went through and had arguments about it. This was back in November 16th. So this is not something that Harvey Rose found. This was not a surprise. This had been going on before, and it was a discussion on it. And in fact, the conclusion of that letter was the 49ers were saying, come to us if there's issues, let's see how we can do it. Figure out what the lost revenue was to the golf course. And I don't know what happened in between that. I think the last comment I saw was that, yeah, we have done this, I forget, it's called the Gold Cup event, and we, the city, performed or participated in that audit with the 49ers. I think the goal was to try to address those deals. And it's just, I think, we saw, I don't know what the rest of the numbers are, but we saw $2.6 million positive cash flow from the stadium. That was the non-NFL events. I don't know what the NFL events bring in, but this is a positive cash flow. I don't know what other event or organization the city does that gets that kind of positive cash flow on it, and not to mention all the debt tied down. First off, the debt was not as high as we thought it might be, and it is being paid down awfully quickly. And that goes also to the questions I asked about the legal services. In fact, in your item 2H, it says that the city will not go back and retroactively ask for more money in the budget unless they come back with the detailed information. And I wasn't asking what the legal arguments were. I was just asking for why did they come back and ask for 700, I guess it's 700,000 more. We had you had a stadium authority meeting where they were asking for, the staff was asking for $875,000. There's a big argument about this banner PR deal, but of that 875, 700,000 of it was the legal services. And I asked what that was. It's one of the tough things when you have these comments at the council meetings, you have 2 minutes, and then that's it. You have no chance to come back. They basically didn't answer the question. In the last city council concurrent meeting, they came back and said, well, that's all privileged information on it. So it's just like when you ask a difficult question, we're not getting an answer, but in the meantime, we're getting from the council, and it goes back to the media, that there's negative things coming on with the 49ers. They're trying to screw the city. And I just would like to see an end to it, because I think there's a lot of positive things that can come from the stadium. And I think if we work together in a better, clearer way, that we could solve those. And I do compliment, I think we should have had a $200,000 audit. This is a long-term, great big dollar item for the city going over 30 years. And it doesn't surprise me that we asked for that audit, and it doesn't surprise me that, there are documentations that we have found that we should be doing. And I think the city managers and the treasurer is working in a very professional manner to get those done. I didn't hear those kind of accusations when we're talking about the documentation of it. But again, I think some details when you ask the city attorney for information, it's all privileged, or it doesn't apply to the stadium authority. So I would just like to see us change direction in our working with the 49ers and the Levi Stadium. I think there's a lot of positives there.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. I'm just going to make a couple comments about a couple things you asked about that we didn't talk about in greater detail during the Stadium Authority meeting. One was the issue on the money that's owed on the golf course parking. It was a multi-year agreement, and that was with the City of Santa Clara, or the Sports and Open Space Authority. So that is not a Stadium Authority issue, although it's related to the parking for the stadium, and that's why it ended up that's why it ended up in the audit. So I think the city attorney can talk about, we can't talk about the details of that because it's an existing dispute, but it's something that we're pursuing, and I don't know, I don't want to say too much, but I want to try to answer questions.
There are 2 letters that are public documents. One says you owe it, where the city wrote a letter to the 49ers saying you owe us money. And then the 49ers wrote the letter that you're referring to. And it's now heading for litigation to try to see who owes who what. So that's about all I have to say about it. But it's a city lawsuit, potentially, against the 49ers.
Yeah, that we're
So that's-
pursuing,
That's,
but
that's,
think
I
that's-
don't,
It takes an audit to even raise the issue, so.
well, no, that's just not true. I mean, we've been discussing this, and this is, you know, we haven't filed a lawsuit yet, but we're looking at it. But the idea of collecting that money has been around for a while. If the first time it became a public knowledge was the audit, has nothing to do with me. That has to do with the prior city manager. So anyway, there's
Okay,
that.
so there's
There's that issue, and then the other issue
Yes.
is the budget. Well, it's very clear from our closed sessions that we have 2 litigations going on with the 49ers in terms of the stadium authority, and it's not wise for me to report how much money is being spent on that litigation because we're in active litigation with an opponent. If I were to start explaining how much money I'm expending or planning or expending on each of those litigations, it would give information to the stadium authority's opponent and endanger the stadium authority's ability to litigate those matters successfully for the taxpayers. I'm not trying to hide anything from the taxpayers. I'm trying to hide my litigation strategy and from our legal opponents, who both of those litigations were filed by the 49ers against the stadium authority. So
Thank you. Just
I'm
revealed
simply
more
trying to
information than you ever did in any of those
well,
other meetings.
it's not normal to me to come to a public meeting and have citizens ask me questions about litigation. So I'm doing this because the mayor's
The
asking me
question
to.
wasn't about litigations, it was about the budget.
All right, well,
Okay, let's have that. I just, both of the litigations, one was the rent reset arbitration. That was very, very public when that happened. And the other was when Manco sued the stadium authority on the management agreement. And that also was very public. It's just those 2, correct? I think.
yeah, it's just
Yeah,
2.
just
There's
those
the
2.
arbitration, the fact
Both
that
actions brought against the stadium authority. So those are, we're not hiding anything. Those were filed against us. So we are, addressing that and through our legal options and legal protections for the stadium authority. And then the golf course payment is going forward. In terms of the rest of the money that's owed, as you probably from unreported staff time and other things that we're also in the audit. Again, a lot of that is part of the 4 years of documents analyzing and comparison. So we probably won't get, final numbers on that until our staff has had the opportunity to go through all those documents for the past 4 years to verify some of the things. Some of the money has been paid back from fire department and other things, and other parts have not. So that's going to be ongoing, and it may be less money, it may be more money that's owed, depending on looking at construction funds and other areas. So that's going to be ongoing for the first 4 years. But what's important to us right now is that from here going forward, that we are amending, changing, completing, improving the way we do things and actually running the stadium authority like it should have been run from day one. And so that's what we're spending all of our time on right now, and improving that and improving the relationship with Manco so that we can cooperatively work together and make sure that what we're doing is informative, is open to the public, is accessible, and making sure that we are, doing our due diligence and taking our fiduciary responsibility for managing the stadium. So we're working together. I really think we're headed in the right direction, but we have a lot of work to do. Teresa?
Yeah, I just wanted to amplify on that, my sense, and the staff can speak in much greater detail to this, is that actually I think that the joint activity and the work has been much better, and actually that's my sense. That also, I think the questions that we're raising, have perhaps helped the 49ers in their role take their game to a higher level, as they're trying to do on the field. And some of the things like some of the, that some of the senior management of the team that has said to me, admitted the issues that they had with their concession, how they were managing their concessionaires, the issues they've had in a number of areas, the fact that they really didn't have a marketing plan, for what they were going to do with the stadium. A lot of these things, I think we're all kind of, they didn't have experience managing a stadium. I mean, they did game day operations, but they weren't the stadium manager at Candlestick. They didn't manage the non-NFL events. Not that there were that many. I don't think they didn't have all the, 250,000 square feet of meeting space and things like that. So I look at this as a chance for everybody to up their game and to learn and to fulfill the potential that the voters agreed to when they passed Measure J. And so I'm pleased at the progress we're making, and I do believe that the tone of the conversation has changed. And a lot of that stuff that happened a couple years ago or whatever, I mean, that's 2 years ago. We're moving forward. We've got a plan. They've got a plan. I see it all as positive.
Okay, anyone else from the public? Thank you. Anyone else? Oh, Pat, go ahead.
You were asking about
Yes.
what our recommendations and motions should be. Before I say that, I just want to say that I was not one of the leaders on this issue. Mayor Gilmore and Vice Mayor then, Teresa O'Neill, were the two that wanted to shine light on this issue and find out what the truth was. And our staff has stepped up to the plate, and they're doing that. I think that the critical thing is that we be very patient. This doesn't happen overnight. The status of the audit recommendations is an incredible amount of work that they've done now, and we just have to wait until they finish their work, and then we can hear everything. And we want a good quality investigation. I think that we complied with the grand jury's recommendation of getting an outside audit when we hired Harvey Rose to look at this. He completed his audit, his company did. They forwarded it to us, and now they're picking it apart and taking recommendation by recommendation and bringing it forward as completed staff work. So let's be patient. I think we should recommend to the council that they hear this report, or maybe an abbreviated version of it, and that we recommend to them option one, that the Stadium Authority hire an auditor of the Stadium Authority to complete the work that the executive director wants and the finance director wants. And I think we should trust their good judgment to decide how this person's going to be deployed. There may be collateral duties that they're asked to do. There may be other staffers that are asked to help them, but I think that's a staff function, not a council function. So I don't know if we recommended to note and file item 2, but if we didn't, I'd throw that in there too, and to accept the information memo on the public safety expenditures. So those are the 3 things I think we should do to the Stadium Authority, just pushing it forward.
Okay.
Can we clarify that? Were you suggesting, Executive Director, the number 1, is it a city employee or just the selection process for appointing a firm? Well, we're talking about a person, not a firm, to assume the role of the Stadium Authority auditor. Is it number 1 or number
1
2?
is a city employee, and we're recommending the assistant treasurer, assistant finance director. Number 2 is where we would bring forward a methodology for a firm.
Okay, so we want 1 then, because
Yes.
it says a city employee, but it would be a Stadium Authority employee.
Yes.
The Stadium Authority,
Yes.
okay, so 1 with a Stadium Authority employee, is that in your motion?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay, I thought so, I thought I heard that.
yes, I was very specific.
We missed that.
I will second that, and I want to say, everything is a work in progress and things change. If we find out that this isn't working to have a city employee do it, or if there's still concerns, or if that's not the right thing, we can come back and change. We're not, nothing is,
Etched in stone.
yeah, I mean, so we have to be, this whole thing is being a little fluid, but let's try to get some stability here. I mean, I think we've come a long way, and like I said, if it's not working, we can make some changes. So I would second those series of motions to note and file the first two reports and to take alternative one to the council.
Yeah, just to get hyper technically legal here, it would be a Stadium Authority Board appointee of a city employee.
We got that. Stadium
Okay.
Authority Board appointee
So
of a city employee.
So it would be the choice of
Up in the
it would be the board actually doing the appointing of that person as the auditor under the joint powers agreement.
Pat said that.
Okay, great.
Stadium Authority Board appointee of a city employee. Okay, there's a motion second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Motion carries. Okay. And I think that leads us to our adjournment. Thank you all very much. This is wonderful work. And Caitlin, welcome. Catlin? Catlin. Oh, I said it wrong. Somebody told me that too. Thank you all for coming.